This is the seminar for Module D, Unit 1, Lesson 3. The topic is population dynamics. So we'll be looking at how organisms of the same species interact when living in a group. In populations, groups of organisms of the same species can change for many reasons. Primarily, immigration is the term we use when we describe an individual that joins a population. Emigration, with an E, is a term we use to describe the situation when an individual leaves a group of population. And a population size changes when the birth and the death rates are not equal. So the two things that would cause a population to grow are births of new organisms or immigration, organisms joining that group. Two things that would cause the population size to decrease are deaths of organisms living in that group or emigration, if one or more of the organisms chooses to leave the group that they've been living in. Environmental factors can also influence population size. Within an environment, there's something called carrying capacity. That's the maximum number of individuals of one species that the environment can support. The image here shows a goldfish bowl, and the idea here is that if you overfill the goldfish bowl, if you pack it with goldfish, there aren't enough resources to support all of those goldfish. There's not enough water, not enough space. Probably even if you dumped a bunch of food in, it wouldn't get to the goldfish at the bottom of the bowl. In contrast, the one on the right here shows just the right number of goldfish living in that environment. They've got space, they have room to move. When you feed the goldfish, the food will make it to all of the goldfish. The amount of water there and oxygen in the water can support those fish. So the amount of food, the amount of water, and the amount of space available for a species will determine the carrying capacity. And here's a graph to show what that looks like. You see the population size increasing for a species until it hits carrying capacity, and then it levels out. Even if more organisms are born, that environment can't support them, and so something has to change. Population can't continue to expand in the same environment. A natural disaster, like a fire or a blizzard, could cause a change in the carrying capacity. It could cause the population to crash because all of a sudden the environment has changed and there aren't enough resources to support the organisms that had previously been living there. Another thing that can have an impact is the movement of a new species into that region, into that environment. If those organisms are competing for the same resources, the same food and water and space, that would change the carrying capacity for the organisms, the species that had been previously living there. Because that same space, there's only so much food and water and space available, and so it can't support any more organisms than it was. If new ones move in, then others will have to leave or they might die off. A number of factors can limit the population size. A limiting factor is a scientific term that we use to describe any factor in the environment that keeps a population size at a level below its full potential. So that means, in theory, more organisms could live in that environment, but for some reason, there's something that's preventing that from happening. Abiotic, remember that means non-living factors that can limit population size include amount of available water, amount of sunlight, nutrients, soil, something in the soil or amount of soil if it's plants, temperature in the environment, and the amount of space available. There are also living or biotic factors that can limit population size, such as predator and prey relationships. We talked a bit in class about Yellowstone National Park, and you watched the video where the narrator talked about when there were not wolves in the park, the deer population exploded. They overgrazed, they ate too much of the plant life, and that had a big impact on the other organisms that were able to live in that environment. The same would be true in a predator-prey situation. Once the wolves moved in and started preying on the deer, that changed some significant factors in the environment overall. Interactions between organisms can influence population size. Competition as you know, is when two or more individuals or populations are trying to use the same thing. They're competing for a resource that there's only so much of. Maybe they're competing for a food source, for a watering hole, for shelter, or for space or territory. Competition can occur among members of the same species. Those high predators that are high up on the food chain have their own territory and they compete for territory. It can also happen, competition can occur between members of different species. Then cooperation is the term we use to describe it when individuals of the same species hunt or live or work together. So you see in the picture the meerkats. They live in a colony, and in this picture they're standing up working together to look for probably predators. Here there are some ants working together to move this large leaf. In your biome project, slide 4 asks you to address population dynamics. So everyone in their project needs to choose an animal in their biome, one that's common in that biome, and describe that animal, explain why it's successful in your biome, describe the special adaptations it has that help it to be successful in that biome, in that environment. Then choose a second thing to address on your population dynamics slide. You should either talk about organisms that your common animal competes with, or talk about how it cooperates with other animals of that same species, like those meerkats we looked at on the last slide, how they were living together and working together to look for predators. So talk about how it cooperates with other animals of the same species for resources like food, water, shelter, or space. And then make sure on that slide that you include a picture of your animal in its natural environment. That's a seminar for Mod D Unit 1, Lesson 3 on population dynamics.